Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for an information session focused on sustainable service delivery at the Roberts Creek Co-housing, Curran Road, Jolly Roger Square, Bay, Secret Cove, and wastewater treatment facilities. This is the second of our sessions. Last night, we spoke with participants from Langdale, Sunnyside, and Wood Creek, and we got two more sessions coming up next week for other participants. And my name is Aidan Buckley. I work as the Manager of Communications and Engagement at the Sunshine Coast Regional District. I want to start off by acknowledging that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is located on the land of the Sechelt and Squamish First Nations. So to give you a bit of a rundown on this evening, we have a panel of SCRD staff who I'll introduce shortly. We got some great information about sustainable service delivery, and we've got lots of time for questions. We're due to keep on going till around 7:30 if we can keep the questions rolling on. So our session this evening is also available on YouTube. So if there's some people who you know who haven't had a chance to make it this evening, please feel free to share the link with them afterwards. So there's a couple of ways that you can ask a question on this virtual session. On the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a little hand, and you can click that and ask a question directly to our panel. You can type your question to the Q&A and chat function is also open for your screen. So there's two options down there as well. I'd ask that you try and use the Q&A as much as you can. I always say this because I'm okay at multitasking. I'm not great. And I know that our panel will spot questions as we go too. I just want to mention that our General Manager of Infrastructure Services, Remco Rosenboom, sends his regrets. Remco is currently heading up our Emergency Operations Centre in relation to our water supply situation. So understandably, he's quite busy. And with that, there's other folks here as well, particularly Shane, who's very involved in that. So appreciate you and giving us your time this evening, Shane. So to our panel, we've Kyle Doyle here, who's our Manager of Asset Management. And many of you recognize Kyle. He did a round of these sessions, I believe just over a year ago. And Shane Walkie, who's our Manager of Utility Services, is here as well. So Kyle, I'm going to ask you just to start sharing your screen there when you have a moment, and we'll get started. So like I say, ask a question anytime throughout, and we'll make sure that we get to them at the end of our presentation. So Kyle, when you're ready, you can take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Aidan. Thank you for coming, everyone. So as Aidan was saying, this is a session to talk about wastewater information and your services. Click here. So tonight we're going to talk about what we're doing here, why we're here. We're talking about how wastewater rates are set. We'll outline some of the challenges for each of the services that you're in. And then we'll talk about the finances for those same services. Give you an idea of what's coming up and what we've been doing in the last little bit. And then we'll have a lot of time for questions, as Aidan said. So I'm sure most of you are aware, we've been doing this engagement and capital planning for a few years now. And early this year and in the beginning of the year and extended to the middle of the year, the board directed staff to develop a plan to better hear from the residents that are serviced by these facilities and to satisfy the requirements and their request to have better engagement. So since then, we've developed a couple facets to this approach. There's some online engagement boards available at SCRD, letstalk.scrd.ca/wastewater. And if you click through there, there's individual boards where you can ask questions and see what other people have asked, and you can see the upcoming events and information for your service. And then we've started to host a few of these sessions. In early September, we hosted an online session, just about sustainable service delivery, and that's available on YouTube if you'd like to review it. And we also had an opportunity for people to come into the Field Road office there and ask questions in person. So getting into it here, how are rates set? User fees are pretty straightforward, and I think most of us are familiar. User fees are used to pay for the operations and maintenance of the service. So any repairs or fixes or small things that have to be done, that's what the user fee revenues are used for. Those are collected from people who are connected to the service. So if you have a house on your property, generally that would be a user. Empty lots typically do not pay user fees at SCRD wastewater services. So these, as I said, they fund the operation, maintenance, and repair costs. There has to be a reserve fund here because we're not allowed to borrow for this sort of work. So we build up a reserve fund to make sure a rainy day fund, if you will. We look at the historical expenses and we project annual costs forward, and we divide it by the number of users, and that's simply the rate that we set for user fees. Similarly, frontage fees are collected from all the participating properties in the service. And these are used to fund capital replacement of the infrastructure. Now, these are typically more expensive projects that can, range into the hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars. And so we look to build a reserve fund to offset the borrowing demands. And we project our expenses forward 50 years in the capital plans. So just to make sure that we're all at the right sessions today, these are the facilities that we're going to be talking about specifically. If you aren't in these, you're welcome to listen along. But if you have questions, we'd like it to be about the 5 facilities here on the screen: Curran, Jolly Roger, Roberts Creek Co-housing, Secret Cove, and Square Bay. Some of the current challenges, just generally, as before we get into this, Curran Road, we're having some upcoming UV lamp and sludge return pump replacements. Jolly Roger and Secret Cove both have some outfall anchoring issues where the outfall has floated recently. Roberts Creek and Square Bay are seeing infiltration concerns, and these are causing some increased pump outs. So as we move towards talking about the financials here, there's been a lot of requests from residents to resume reporting the expenses and the revenues at each of your facilities. And I've done some research and we found that they are being reported every year in the annual financial plan. You can find those. Aiden's being so kind as to put the links up on the Let's Talk pages. So you can find the links to the financial plan on your Let's Talk pages. And they're around page 111 this year. But if you just search for your either your name, Curran Road in this case, or the number here, 391, you'll come up with this set of information. It shows the actual expenses, the budgeted expenses and revenues, and then financial forecasting going forward. These reports show the revenues, frontage fees, parcel taxes, user fees, and whatnot, and the expenses for your service. If you have any specific questions about this, you can get a hold of us through the Let's Talk page, and we'd happily explain some of the more details. So onto the long-term financial kind of outlook for the capital side of things for Curran Road. What you see on the screen here is the capital model across the next 50 years. And we've projected what would occur if we had no changes to the existing fee structure other than just a 2% annual increase to match what was typically CPI inflation. And so, what you can see here is the Curran Road has a few small improvements that are projected in the next 40 or so years, and then a significant one, and that incurs a large increase in the projected frontage fee for the service, because we'd have a large debt servicing cost after that period. Financial sustainability and the whole idea of sustainable service delivery is to try to avoid a large cost in the increase of service like this. And so you can see as we click through into the next slide here, that if we can do some capital planning, we can reduce the overall expense on the frontage fee side by a significant amount. And that's the idea of what we're trying to look for here. Now, Curran Road and Square Bay are 2 facilities where the community has been quite engaged. We've had wonderful feedback and engagement discussions with several of the residents who in turn have had a great dialogue with their neighbors. And earlier in the year, we were sent a proposal from these 2 neighborhoods. So I thought I would just kind of draw attention to them and present them on a similar format. Now, the proposal that we received was to move towards I believe, a $400 a year frontage fee in the next year or so, and then ahead by 2% after that. And so you can see if we do that, you still have a similar situation. We've mitigated the scale of the increase here, but it still is a pretty significant jump. And so I think, it's a good idea moving forward, but there's probably some more work that needs to be done to try to avoid that scale of a jump. And so we've taken that idea of the plan presented by the Curran Road residents, and we've just added every 5 years if we had a little bit of a bump, and we modeled it. And I think what this all goes to show, in the next 5 years, the change is fairly moderate. But we still need to make changes going forward. So what we're hearing from the residents is that they'd like some certainty in their frontage fees. And I think that although the plan may not be perfect across the 50-year model, it has a lot of merit that we can work from. So going forward, the work that's been done at Curran Road in the last 2 years, we've had a flow meter installed on the effluent pumping line. This is helping to better manage and record the discharge volumes. The entire plant was pumped out in November when we had the atmospheric river, and that caused some facility upset. The process wasn't treating the effluent adequately. Going forward, we're looking at a replacement of sludge pump and UV treatment lamps and stuff to ensure the treatment processes are working. So the next facility on the list is Jolly Roger. And similarly, the financial report can be found in the financial plan, and the same categories are shown on there. If you have any questions about this, please let us know. We'll try to answer them. Now, Jolly Roger's long-term capital outlook. We see a treatment plant in the next several years as a potential project we're going to have to do. The treatment plant's aging, it's nearing the expected useful life. And so we see if we don't do any changes to the frontage fee in the near term, the debt associated with this project will necessitate a significant increase. And we can continue at that. And then when we get to the point we need to do the outfall within the next 40 years or so, we'll see another significant increase. Similarly, with some proactive capital planning, we can reduce the magnitude of the overall increase by quite a bit here. And so that's what we will be presenting when we talk to the board of the benefits of this sort of capital planning. So with Jolly Roger, we had quite a bit of work done this year. Influence screens were replaced, in 2021. We were having some pumps that were wearing out because of the damaged influence screens weren't screening the incoming fluids so well. The aeration pump was reinstalled to improve the treatment processes. And the ocean outfall line was recently repositioned as it floated to the surface. The reason for the line to float to the surface is still being explored, and whether or not there's more work that's needed to ensure it doesn't happen again is something we're looking into. Going forward, as this is one of the plants where we do have forecasted and end of useful life, typically, we'd like to get a feasibility study in to help us understand the magnitude of the work that is required to either extend the life of this plant or the options for replacement. And then, as I said, further anchoring of the outfall lane is possible. So this similar slide for Roberts Creek co-housing. The annual report showing the financial statement is available online. And again, I'm just putting this up here. So if anyone would like to see what it looks like, this is what you're looking for. If you have any questions, you can pause the YouTube video and take a look at this as well. So again, for Roberts Creek, the forecasted 50 years, if we do no changes to the current frontage fees, there's a slight increase needed to facilitate some debt in the near future, and then a bit larger one in about 20 or so years that we see. And again, with a little bit of proactive capital planning, we can reduce the overall increase by quite a bit. I suppose I may not have touched on this. There's two lines on these capital plans. The light green one represents 2022 dollars, and the dark green one represents dollars in the year of the charge. So we put this on there just for comparative sakes, and it helps present the information as a 2022 dollars. So for Roberts Creek, in the last 2 years, we had several pump outs. And the reason I should say this is a significant work is we've had a 100% increase in the cost of our pump outs. And so these have become significant expenses in our operating budgets. We've done quite a few facility upgrades, including new piping and lid reinforcement. Pumps were sized and improved filters were put in there. And we did some valve and programming. So going forward, there's some more infiltration work we're trying to get done to improve, make sure that we're just putting down, pee and poo into our toilet systems. And then we're continuing to work to report from the Ministry of Environment to Vancouver Coastal Health, which changes our effluent requirements, as we've talked with Roberts Creek Cove in the past about. Getting into Secret Cove, we have your same financial statement available here. And this is, like I said, available on the Let's Talk pages and if you search on the SCRD website. Secret Cove has a similar to Jolly Roger, an aging facility, which is nearing the end of its useful life. And so we anticipate a replacement in the next decade or so. If we have no changes to the frontage fee, what we're going to see is a debt-induced cost of service here. And then if we continue on at 2% from there, when it's time to do the collection system and the outfall, we'll have a fairly significant increase of the cost of service. So with some capital planning, this just demonstrates that if we do some proactive work, we can reduce the overall cost of service and on the capital side of things. And so this represents a scenario where we do some increases in the near term and are able to keep the frontage fee at a consistent 2% increase across the next 40 years or so. Secret Cove, similar to Jolly Roger, had some filters replaced, which because they weren't working so well, required pumps to be replaced. This work required a pump out. During the last 2 years, an aeration pump was reinstalled, and this improved our treatment processes. At the same time, some programming updates were completed, and the outfall at Secret Cove is shared with Jolly Roger. And so when it was floated to the surface, that work affected both of these services. Going forward, similar to Jolly Roger, this service is looking to have a feasibility study done to inform the next steps and how we can either prolong the life of the treatment plant or the most appropriate replacement option. Here's the financial information for Square Bay. Again, that's on the Let's Talk page. So here's the 50-year outlook at Square Bay. What we see is if we don't make no changes to the frontage fee, we have a fairly reasonable situation until about 40 years from now, where we have an escalation in fees that become quite aggressive when the treatment plant needs to replace or projected to replace in about 50 years. So this page here shows that with a little bit of capital planning and foresight, we are able to reduce the number of jumps we see in the cost of the service and the frontage fee in the future because of the large amount of debt we would have had. And by building the reserve, we're able to mitigate the amount of debt we have until the end here when the treatment plant comes and we get into the high amount of debt. Similar to Curran Road, the community group sent us a proposal, and I thought I'd put it on the page here to share. We had a proposal to go to $400 a year next year and then go up at 2% from there. So while there is a positive improvement there, we do see under this, if we don't continue to see a few more increases in the future, the debt rises and subsequently the frontage fee would need to increase to accommodate the debt. So we did a little bit of a modified proposal after a discussion with some of the residents who had submitted it. And if, again, we did some stepped increases, we can achieve a similar mitigation of the overall result. It still is about, in $2022, twice as much as if we had done a bit more aggressive work in the beginning, but it is a step in the right direction. And I think that, it would be more tenable to future residents than the alternative. So at Square Bay, we've seen some repairs to the collection system. We're trying to stop the surface runoff infiltration that we're seeing. We've had a replacement of a section of the collection main, and we've also replaced some uninterrupted power supplies on the UV reactors as we've been having some more storm events, and we don't want to have fuses being blown during those power outages we see. For Square Bay, we having, like I said earlier, some significant infiltration problems that are causing the processes to be challenged in the treatment plant. And so for that reason, we're looking to have an engineering study done to help us address the collection system deficiencies. And this will inform further work to control infiltration in the collection system, just to make sure the plant can do its work. Okay, I need a drink of water here. I will stop talking for a little bit and let you guys ask some questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. If you're okay to stop screen sharing when you get a moment after you've had your drink of water. Sorry, I should have let you have that first. We got a couple of questions come in. Peter, Andreas, I'll get to yours now in a second. Brian, I'm going to promote you up here if you want to ask your question yourself. You're more than welcome. I see you had your hand raised. So Brian, you should be able to talk now and ask your question. We got you there, Brian? No, Brian, you jump in whenever you want here. What I'll do is very quickly I'll jump over to something because since we just finished with Square Bay. And Brian, when you if you're able to figure out your audio there, just let me know. And you can raise your hand again. I'll be able to promote you here. Just looking here. So yeah, so we had a comment there from Peter. You might be able to see it in the Q&A. Kyle, maybe I'll read it out for everybody. He said, Kyle, the proposals from Square Bay and Curran Road showed a frontage fee increase to around $400, as you said, for a 5-year period, but not state that this was the only increase over the term of the plan as your graph indicated. What we proposed was that a mid and long-term solution would be discussed and resolved over the 5 years, recognizing that other increases might be necessary. And I see that Peter's put his hand up. So Peter, I'm just going to promote you here to talk if you wish to add anything. So.
Thanks, Aidan. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you perfect. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So the only reason I'm following from putting that comment up is that I didn't get enough time to look at the graphic that you had there, Kyle. And number two, I'm not quite sure where you're headed. Are you in this discussion going to be showing a number of options that you're planning to go forward to the board with?
No, sorry. I think what you wrote in your comment was exactly right. Your proposal was a short-term proposal, as you said, and so I was just highlighting how there would continue to be discussion on how to resolve the the long term. And I think we're not planning on showing a lot of options here. I think that what we talked about and is reflected in this is that we need some certainty in about the 4 to 5 year term of what sort of rates these services will see, including yours. And I think that would be something that would be beneficial for both the residents and staff as we move forward, trying to look at the long term.
Okay. And I don't want to go in and rehash, because in an hour and a half with 4 other communities part of this discussion, there isn't enough time to go into a lot of history. But I'll just reiterate that fundamentally that the Curran Road and, well, I would say the vast majority of Area B communities, wastewater communities, have a strong belief that the idea of a fully funded reserve doesn't work, and that it's a combination of, I know the whole philosophy about whether you can or can't go for grants and the whole issue about debt, but I'm not going to go at length on that. I'm just going to restate that hasn't gone away. And I think you recognized it in that graphic you had. I just didn't have enough time to digest what you were showing us. So I'll shut up there for now.
No, thank you, Peter. I always appreciate your input. I think, we've revised since we first presented these capital plans in the rainy October. It seems like a dream, or maybe it was a December in Cooper's Green Hall there. We've revised them significantly, and one of the things that we have addressed is making sure we include debt servicing as one of the ways we pay for the capital improvements. And if you do get the opportunity to pause the rapid presentation, I think Square Bay, my mouth was so dry I could barely talk at that point. I've been talking for so long. So if you take a second to pause, we do show a significant amount of debt. It is a difficult projection with the subsequent $1 million replacements we see with the collection system, but we're using debt as much as we can. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thanks for that, Peter. Peter, after what we'll do is I'll put the deck up on the Let's Talk page afterwards as well, so you can take a look through yourself in your own time. Lyle, Frank, I see your hands are up there. I'm just going to get to a couple of questions that have come into the Q&A. Andreas is asking, is the option of combining the Secret Cove and Jolly Roger treatment plants, is that being considered, or is it being evaluated when the plants need to be replaced? So whether or not we combine them when they need to be replaced.
Yeah, thanks, Aidan. And I also see that Alan has asked a similar question.
Yeah.
So in the last couple of years, what we did is we did feasibility studies on 3 other wastewater plants: Langdale, Greaves Road, and Merrill Crescent. And from those feasibility studies, it was found, it was looked into where is our plant at, and what is suggested in it as a replacement option for the plants. And in those options, because of those feasibility studies, we've applied for a grant at Langdale. Hopefully we'll find out in 2023 to see if it's successful or not. But it certainly helps. You need a feasibility study to do things like that. And so Secret Cove and Jolly Roger, we're hoping that next year we will have funds to do a feasibility study similar to the plants that I just talked about. And certainly it's been brought up by staff and by people in the community. Would there be an advantage to connecting the 2 plants together? Now, I certainly know operating small plants is challenging, and it would be nice if they were combined. But I also know that the topography in that area is very challenging as well. And currently everything gravity feeds into each one of the plants, and then it gravity feeds out into the outfall. And there's no pumping, no electrical costs, anything like that. So I can see that if they were connected, there probably would be, a pretty hefty electrical bill to do some pumping. And then you pump it somewhere to combine them, and then you have to still get it back to the outfall. So the quick answer would have been yes, but that's a long answer there for you. That I certainly am going to put in the feasibility studies the option of looking into combining the 2 plants if it's even feasible or not.
Great stuff. Thanks, Shane. Cindy has a question. It's one which came up yesterday evening, and I'm sure it's maybe top of mind for everybody when we see, we're over 100 days without any significant rainfall here on the coast. And Cindy's asking, how does the water shortage and our trying to conserve water affect our systems?
Mm-hmm. I know, I don't know particular numbers off of some of our plants, but I certainly know the wastewater treatment system for the district of Sechelt is seeing considerable drops in effluent going into their plants. So I'm assuming the same is happening for our plants. But in discussion with the operators, we're not noticing too much of a problem with our treatment, but we do have some plants that have high water content, high liquid content compared to food for the bugs, and that does cause problems. And also we have plants that have a high food, which causes a problem. So those are challenges for the operators that they deal with on a regular basis. But right now, I wouldn't say that we've seen increased issues. We've certainly noticed over the years, things like low flush toilets, low flow shower heads have also caused the influent to be more higher level solids. Thanks, Aidan.
Thanks, Shane. Lyle, I'm going to promote you here to talk. So you should be able to do so here shortly. So Lyle, you feel free there to ask your question when you're ready. I think you just need to unmute there if you can as well. So I ask you to unmute to see if you can.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Lyle? Yeah, we got you perfect, Lyle. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Yeah. We've had an ample discussion on the capital issues over the last 3 or 4 years. And, I think we're probably in reach of some resolution down the line after some more discussion. But I'm more interested right now in the cost of the operations. And I have researched the financials on the Let's Talk page, and particularly related to wages and benefits and operating costs, which are 2 of the biggest ones on that operating budget and financials. Those of us, well, many of us in business know that the pressures for cost reduction are continuous. and are absolutely necessary to remain competitive. And secondly, we also have experienced the fact that as your experience increases with any operation, your cost reduction is comes down. I think there've been a lot of studies that indicate when experience doubles, you get anywhere from 15 to 25% cost reduction. So I have two questions. One is, what have been the results of cost reduction in your operations over the last, say, 4 years, where we have had 25% inflation in our operating costs for the last 4 years, each individual year? So what have been the results of cost reduction programs in terms of the operating of our plants? And the second one is, have you, particularly related to Square Bay, we're now in our 4th year of operation of that plant. Initially, increases in the cost of operations of that plant were probably to be expected because it was a new operation. We had a lot to learn. What have we learned that has resulted in cost reductions or avoidance of costs in the operation of the Square Bay plant? So those are my two questions. What have we done for cost reduction, and what's the result? 2, have we experienced what everybody experiences in terms of the experience curve and cost reduction associated with Square Bay?
Perfect. Thank you for that, Lyle. Who wants to take that one? Shane, Kyle.
I'll start off. I think first talking about the pressures that we've had on cost increases. As Kyle noted earlier, part of one of the largest costs in operation is contracted services, which include trucking and hauling of solid wastes, and that has exponentially increased in cost over the last few years. And unfortunately for Square Bay, we've needed to pump out quite a few times. Other things that have also been corrected in recent years was, for the longest time, the vehicle that was being used to access these wastewater plants wasn't actually being charged to the wastewater plants. And so that correction and the cost and the fuel for that vehicle increased operating costs. Also, it was noted a couple of years back that we needed to spend more time at these plants. The proper maintenance wasn't being done, and so another staff member was hired. So for all 15 wastewater plants, we have 2 people, 2 FTEs, as we call them, 2 full-time equivalents that work at these plants and do their best to keep them in operation. Some of the cost reductions, Square Bay, for example, is we're trying to correct infiltration. That's probably the biggest challenge with Square Bay. Is it's so frustrating that we will have the operations, the plant working well, and then we have a big rainstorm and we get infiltration into the plant, and that plant treatment process is affected by the high flows because it's called an upflow sludge blanket process. And there's actually a blanket in the middle of the plant of solids that stops the other solids getting through, basically. And when you have a high flow, it upsets the blanket. And then we have to have staff go to site and try to deal with the upset blanket and the high flows into the plant. So we are working on, if you would say, cost reduction at Square Bay by trying to correct infiltration. But there's still a lot of work to go, and it's been such a long dry spell. We're a bit concerned about it's funny, I've got 2 hats on here. We're concerned on wastewater when these rains come because we're going to get infiltration, and we're hoping that some of the work we've done will have reduced our need to respond to emergencies. Now, on the other hat that I wear, I sure hope it rains a lot in the next week because that would be nice. So let me see here. Did I answer your question, Lyle? Do you need more information?
Well, you gave me a lot of examples of how your costs have increased. I think my question was, what have you done to reduce costs?
Well, as I said, I think the one thing that we are doing at Square Bay is to correct infiltration, which is causing callouts for staff to go to the site with very expensive pump trucks. I think there's lots more work to do still. There's only so much really we can do on cost reductions. I think, as you mentioned about staff and their skills, the person that we hired has good skills, and she's doing what she can to try and reduce these callouts. She also, what's interesting is I keep finding the opposite to what you're asking, but she's also put more aeration into Jolly Roger treatment plant. And so what that's done is caused the hydro bill to increase, but it's caused our effluent quality to be excellent. So you can see where we've found an efficiency by improving the treatment process, but it's caused the operating costs to go up. But we're getting better samples. So it's sometimes you win, sometimes you lose by improving things.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'd like to have further discussion on that, but I don't want to hog time. So thank you very much. And I really appreciate you guys getting together today to talk to us about these things. I know it's tough issues, but it's been really tough for us. Our appreciation has been in terms of operating costs and user fees, and have been, as I mentioned, 25% increase per year. We'd love to have the 8.7% inflation that we have now regarding everything else, looking at the history of our 25% per year. And not only that, 2022 was an increase of in wages and benefits and operating costs of over 70%. And I don't know, looking forward, there was some indication that might go higher next year. So anyway, those things really need to be looked at in addition to the capital issues that certainly have been, you guys been very responsive on. So let's talk about and let's look at the operating costs very seriously for this upcoming budget. That would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Lyle. I really appreciate it. And like I said, the conversation doesn't have to stop here. We do have those individual community spaces here on Let's Talk. And the link is in the chat there, so you can feel free to ask questions on there anytime you want. Just one, I'm just going to skip ahead a couple of questions here because Peter's just looking for some clarification, and I think I can hopefully give it. Shane, if I get this wrong, let me know. He's asking whether there's 2 personnel assigned to each plant or 2 assigned to handle all facilities together, and it's 2 assigned to handle all facilities together, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Next up, Andreas, and then Frank, I'll get over to you here in a moment. You can ask your question. Andreas is asking, since we can't apply for grants unless there are some funding shortfalls, to what extent is debt grant funding incorporated into all these projections? Sounds like a Kyle question.
Yeah, actually, maybe I'll just quickly share my screen again to do this visually. And this comes back to a question Peter is having about making sure we incorporate grant funding. And so if you look at these graphs that we have in the models, this brown line here represents the debt that we'd be taking on. So with Secret Cove, which I think would be a good example here, when we look to the replacement of the treatment plant, we're certainly considering a debt there. And then you can see, even though we are building up a fairly good reserve, we are considering a fair amount of debt as we go into the replacement of this. So we have to balance the financial sustainability policies and the debt management policies we have here. We can't take on a extraneous amount of debt, but at the same time we are looking to balance it where we can. So I hope that answers that question.
Perfect. Thank you, Carl. Frank, I'm going to bring you into our panel here. And if you want to unmute there, you can go ahead and you can ask your question yourself. Frank, I see you've unmuted, so please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Aidan, and thanks to Kyle and Shane for putting this together and making yourselves available to everybody. It's much appreciated. And Kyle, thanks for sending that financial information. And you said now that it's on the website, which is good. And I hopefully you put up the capital reserves too. I haven't had a chance to look at that, the operating and capital reserves. But I just wanted to say, the group of us at Curran Road, we strongly support what Peter said, so I won't repeat all that. And I know that, I guess we're hoping that staff will support the proposal we made, the 2023 to 2027, $400 plus rate. And then during that time, gives time for conversation to take place, and where do you go after that? And well, what do we see should happen? Just a couple of quick questions here. One, on the Curran Road, one of those charts at 2025, there was a slight capital expenditure, and I'm not quite sure what that was, or did I read that right? And then the other question, just the approval process again this year for the frontage rates, frontage fees and user fees. Remember last year in mid-November, it went to the infrastructure committee, then to council. You've restructured your committees. Is there another committee it goes to before it goes to the board, and when are those meetings? Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate it. Call Shane, leave it over to you.
So with respect to the process, as far as the rates go, it's part of the budget process. And so on, I believe most of the capital plans we brought to the board December 5th this year. So you can look to our agendas page if you are interested in joining us in that conversation or watching along. I'm not sure if the user fees are coming at the same time, but it's around that time of year, end of the year for pre-budget, we bring forward the projected user rates and frontage fees. Sorry, Frank, you had another question about a capital expense around 2025 in the models. And looking at the Excel spreadsheet here, we've allocated $189,000 for the demolition and the rehabilitation of the existing RBC plant. Whether or not that happens in that time frame, that's just a projected expense that we'll have to take care of that building at some point.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. So that further to that, Frank, the RBC shaft in the RBC is a rotating biological contactor. It's a big drum. That was the plant that ran there for years and years and years. Well, finally the shaft broke inside the drum, so we can't use it anymore. And we had estimates to replace or repair. It's very costly. So we just need to decommission it, and that's the funds to basically remove the roof off that original part, pull all the guts out, and put it to bed, basically.
I guess I'm presuming then that the fast plant that's in there will be up to operational speed at that point.
Yeah, we're still working on improving the effluent quality, though we're meeting permit, but we want to get better. So that's an ongoing challenge.
Okay, is it, and what is the effluent discharge criteria? Is it 45-45 or is it 10-10? As per that?
Yeah, the plant was designed for 10-10, and the outfall permit is 45-45. And I'm not exactly sure what it's getting right now, but I think it's in the 20 to 30 range that we're discharging. So we want to, our goal is to reduce it down to 10-10.
Yeah, so it's within the permit, the outfall permit range.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's one of the plants that has a high content inlet inflow of effluent. So that's one of the challenges at Curran Road is usually the inflow into wastewater plants is 250 BOD TSS, and this one, we think it might be 300 or above 300 coming in. So that's one of the challenges for the operators. And also at Curran Road, we're wondering if it's the grinder pumps, all the particles that come into the plant seem to like working their way through the plant rather than staying in the trash tank. So those are a couple of challenges the operators are working on.
Yeah, we stopped using our sink grinder just for that purpose. You mentioned in November a year ago in the floods that there was the plant had to be pumped out, and I thought being a low pressure collection system, you shouldn't have very much inflow or infiltration into the facility.
Yeah, part of it, there's manholes. Part of it is gravity. So there was inflow through there, and I believe those costs, if I'm correct, I don't know if you remember, Kyle, were covered through emergency BC for the pumping of that. I believe we claimed those costs, so they weren't borne by the local service area.
Good. Aidan, I might have another question or two, but proceed with others.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, you can stick your hand up again if you want. You can ask a couple more. You're more than welcome. I'll jump into our Q&A here real quick, and then Joan, I'll get to you, and then Peter, and then I'm sure Frank, you'll roll back around at some point. I also just put in the chat there about our agenda. So Kyle mentioned that December 5th meeting. Our agendas are usually posted at scrd.ca/agendas on the Friday before the meetings take place. You can go ahead and you can take a look at them there before you take part in the meetings. And I'd be very happy to hear if you've navigated on our website on a number of occasions that we have a new website on the way, which will function far better as well. Jerry is speaking about Roberts Creek co-housing, is saying at Roberts Creek, our neighbors have complained of odors coming off the system since we reduced flushing on account of the ongoing drought here. I don't know, Shane, if you might have a comment on that.
Yeah, I'm surprised about that. We heard about that recently, and we understand one of the neighbors was pumping their septic tank out at some point. Like they have their own private tank. Maybe that was what was smelled. But part of the improvements to the Roberts Creek co-housing was to put carbon filters on the discharge outlets for the air, like it's a pressurized system, and when it releases the air, we have these carbon filters. We've sealed the tanks. We just recently put new lids on them. So I'm surprised anything's getting out, and staff are taking another look, but I did talk to them about it recently, and they say they haven't smelled anything. So we'll keep looking, keep sniffing.
Thanks, Shane. Joan, I'm going to promote you into the chat here, and feel free to unmute there. So that's again Joan just coming into the chat, and I see you've unmuted, so please go ahead and ask your question, Joan.
Actually, one of the questions is, as a community, we really try to conserve water, but I'm wondering if it really affects how effective the treatment plant is by not putting very much water into our system with our waste.
So Joan, I don't know if you're at Roberts Creek co-housing, but we have Roberts Creek co-housing doesn't actually have much food. So that's a good system where people aren't dumping extra stuff down the toilets. But it also challenges the bugs. There's bugs in there that need to stay alive. And that's one location that it seems like we have a lot of liquid compared to food for the bugs. So when the water is reduced in this time, maybe it will help. We'll see. We haven't really noticed it as far as I know through the operators yet.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Sean. We got a question here from Alan. It's in the Q&A there as well. Panel, if you want to take a look at it, it's saying it looks like the Jolly Roger and Secret Cove treatment plants need a $700,000 upgrade in 2029. Is that the same 700,000, or is the cost expected to be 1.4 million?
That's a great question, Alan. It's not the same 700,000. That would be independent treatment plants in this projection. And so because staff, we haven't done the construction and the development of these treatment plants, we don't have a present idea accurately of what the costs of them are. So if anytime we do work on a treatment plant to replace it, we like to use that as a comparison when we use projections. So this $700,000 will be better informed once we get the feasibility study done, and then we'll have an engineer's estimate giving us a bit better of a projection of those costs needed to replace those treatment plants.
Well, and that, Kyle, that goes back to the question that was asked earlier. You know, if we combine the two systems, it's a totally different setup we're talking about. If we have two separate plants, it's a different cost. So that's just an estimate for now. And hopefully if we can do feasibility studies, they'll be more honed in on actual costs.
Yeah, and just to touch on the feasibility study things a bit more, for those that are curious, you can look at some of the other on the Let's Talk pages. If you go to the Langdale the Greaves Road or the Merrill Crescent, you can click through to the feasibility studies that we've done there, and you'll see that they give us an idea of the different options we may have and some rough estimates on the costs for them. So we expect if we have feasibility studies done for both of these plants at a similar time, we'll be asking the consultant to at least provide us a ballpark, what it would take to make it a one plant option.
Yeah. And I think the costs for Langdale are similar. The grant that we've applied for at Langdale is $1 million for that wastewater plant.
Thank both of you for that. And if you're looking to navigate to any of the other wastewater treatment facilities, you can do that on the Let's Talk page. You just go letstalk.scrd.ca/wastewater. It's the link that I put into the chat. And if I manage to navigate myself to one of the feasibility studies, I'll put it into the chat here as well. Bob, I'm going to just ask you a question, and Peter, I'll come to you next. Bob's asking, are you prepared to support the proposals put forward by Curran Road and Square Bay? And if not, what will you be recommending and the timing of the same?
That's a fair question, Bob. Since we did the analysis on the proposals from the residents, we've had a little bit of a revision on the capital projections for Square Bay, based on the idea that we might need some work done on the collection system in the more near term. And so I'm not exactly sure the difference between the two proposals. I think that the proposal from the residents is a step in the right direction, and I'm supportive of that idea. What I like to do is present the board with as much information as possible so they can make the most informed decision, and that's my role here at the SCRD.
Thank you, Kyle. And Peter, I'm just going to promote you into the chat or into the panel here. So unmute there when you're ready, and you can ask your question, Peter.
Okay. Thanks, Aidan. So this picks up on the question Frank asked and exactly what you just said now, Kyle. Frank asked about the sort of the process, I guess, and I think your answer was that there'd be the December 5th meeting and budget discussions. So a wee bit of background. A year ago, even though I was trying to track agendas, I somehow missed you guys coming up with a report that went in November on user and frontage fees, or at least maybe I only found out at the last minute. So what can you give a little more clarity? I'm assuming that the product and what you hear today will factor into it, but you will be putting a report of some format together going to the board, like you said, with options and the best information. When do you think that report will be submitted, or is that sort of at the December 5th meeting, or will it go to one of the committees like there's the new committee group you have, I've just lost the name of it at the moment, but or is it the committee of the whole? I know it's part of the budget process, but help us a little bit here.
I will quickly pull up the agenda page and see if specifically what it is. My understanding is it's a pre-budget meeting.
I believe for user fees, Kyle, you might be able to find it on there, but I believe there's a meeting at the end of November where we will be presenting options for user fees. So it's interesting with the way it goes. We need to approve the rates by the end of the year, but the budget doesn't pass until the new year. So that's where sometimes things don't align.
And when you say a meeting, Shane, is that again, whose meeting? Is it a designated committee, or is it just an ad hoc budget group?
So typically these would go to the electoral area services committees, because they're not the committee of the whole is for items that involve municipalities, and these don't have any municipality members that are affected by them. So most wastewater service questions and issues we brought to the EAS meetings, I believe they're called, electoral area service committee meetings. Now the December 5th meeting is a special budget meeting. It is separate from all of those. So it'd fall under the budget and corporate. I'm not sure what they'll call it this year, to be honest with you. They've changed the meeting names, and I'm as confused as you are, to be honest.
So, okay, so there's the December 5th meeting that's purely a budget related issue or issues. The user fees, though, I think I'm now hearing that will absolutely go through the electoral area service committee before it moves further, right?
I believe that's correct.
I believe so as well, Peter. This year's a little bit different because of the elections and the new board. So, you know, I believe a few things are being moved around, but it's at the end of November, early December. I'm not sure exactly which meeting it's going on.
Okay.
I will follow up with you, Peter. I have your email and I'll let you know.
Okay, thanks, guys.
No worries.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Peter. And what we'll do as well is, you know, you can keep an eye on us on Facebook as well, and we'll make sure that we're posting up on our homepage as well. And when those meetings will be taking place, too. And let me see here. Andreas has a question here. He's asking, do any of the waste treatment plants have some excess capacity? Should there be further densification in the area? Good question.
Usually wastewater plants are designed for the development that they're servicing. So, you know, the general answer would be no. If a property were to join a service area, we would at that time we would review the capacity in the system and see what would be required to address the new flows coming into the plant. So generally, if you design a 90-lot subdivision, you design the plant at 2.5 times, 2.25 times the dry weather flow for those 90 properties. And that's it. There's usually not excess capacity.
Sure. Thank you, Shane. Bob, I'm going to bring you into the panel here. And so feel free to unmute there and ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me? I'm not sure if you can or not. I'm not an
Yeah,
IT.
we got you, Bob. Yeah.
Well, I guess my first question is, why are you having a feasibility study when somebody, as far as I can ascertain, has just picked 10 years as the only useful life left in our plant? It's not a high-tech plant. We've always met the outfall regulations, to my knowledge, and we still continue. And they say our plant's going to be no good or no useful life in 10 years. Has there been somebody of qualifications that done an inspection that has put a 10-year life on it, or is just a number you guys have picked out of the air? And my question is, what if somebody does an inspection and says that this plant will run for another 20 years, not 10 years? And why are we doing a feasibility study for a plant that may not be necessary? It may be necessary in your eyes, but as far as I can see, it doesn't appear that the plant is not functioning properly right now. We have never had the plant problems that some of the other plants have had, and yet you're budgeting for something that, in my question is, why do we need a new plant in 10 years? Who's told you that you need a new plant in 10 years in Secret Cove?
I can start, Kyle, and you can end it. I think, Bob, you sort of answered some of your questions. This is going to be a professional looking at this plant to tell us the life expectancy, that what they'll take a look at the plant and see what it needs and see what a good option to replacing it is. So this is a fantastic opportunity to have a professional look at it. Kyle, you can talk more about the capital life.
No, I mean, that's a great point. And you know, these typically the best practices are that wastewater plants have a set lifespan, and so that's where that time frame comes from. And exactly like you said, we'd like to have someone who has a lot of experience in these things come in and tell us, can it last longer? And if they say it can last 25 years, Bob, there's absolutely nothing we would be more happy to hear. And so, you know, with the other feasibility studies we got, the professional gave us some recommendations on some small maintenance work that we could do that would extend the life of the plant. But you know, typically these plants last about 50 years, and now is the time we'd like to have that information at our you know, availability to make these decisions. And that's the rationale for this. And so the reason that we haven't rushed the feasibility study is because we seek out grants and we were successful. We prioritized based on age and condition, our wastewater facilities, and the top 3 have received grants for their feasibility. Cove is with Jolly Roger next on the priority list in our grant applications. So we're looking for any way we can to offset these costs, but at some point it's going to become more important to have that information so we can make decisions than it is to wait for the potential to have a grant.
Well, thank you. One of the other questions I have is basically when I look at a lot of other plants that have been replaced, and there was a report done, I think the original one was done in 2005, and it was basically done by different ministers of all the different provinces as to how you finance wastewater plants. And in that report, it said users of less than 500, and obviously 30 approximately in Secret Cove, or even if you include the Jolly, were certainly under 500 people. That alternate sources of financing should be looked into. Applying, from my understanding, I don't see that you guys have been looking for other financing, whereas I turn around and I see Powell River has new wastewater plants. Basically, it's a third the feds, a third the province, and a third by the users. In Secret Cove, you're coming to us and you're saying, well, we want you to pay for it all. That doesn't seem to be what happens in a lot of cases. And why is it not being looked into that the federal government and the provincial government, I know you're applying for, you do apply for some grants, but why wouldn't it be looked into before we start making up bills that you want to give to us to basically pay for it all by ourselves?
Well, I would say we do look for grants where we can. Square Bay would be a great example where we've recently acquired a grant and had a significant impact on reducing the financial burden on the residents. And as I was saying, for the feasibility studies, we certainly look for the grants. There gets to be a point, we have a statutory obligation to treat the wastewater, especially that's more stringent for those services where you discharge into the ocean. And so we have to be in a position, to provide that level of treatment for these services. And if there's no grant funding available, we don't choose where the programs are started and who gets accepted. At some point, the cost is borne by the service participants. That's the way that regional district service delivery is legislated in the BC laws. So,
and you have to budget, Kyle, assuming you're not going to get a grant because they're not guaranteed. And fortunately, the regional district has been very fortunate with grants. And you touched on Square Bay. I believe that was about a $700,000 grant that the Square Bay area was able to use. We applied for, and that had a feasibility study done by an engineering company. Then the next one, Wood Creek Park, we had a feasibility study done by another engineering company, and that one was successful, getting a grant close to $1 million. It's it's up there. I can't remember the exact amount. And we've done the similar process with Langdale, that we did this feasibility study and we have applied for a grant and hopefully we're successful. So there's three examples of how feasibility studies have led to grant funding, but you can't rely on that, because I know from my experience, some projects we apply and reapply for grant funding and we are never successful. So it really depends on which grant funding is available. And your presentation, we have to fill out lots and lots of forms to get grants, and they want all the lines filled in. And that's where the feasibility studies really come in, and they really like those. So I think that's really helped with our success rate. And I hope it's successful if we get feasibility studies and determine that these plants need to be replaced. I hope we are successful, but we can't rely on them.
Yeah, Shane, you touched on a good point there, actually, with feasibility studies being an essential part. You hear shovel-ready projects are what the federal government wants to fund. So feasibility studies give us direction and allow us to inform the grantors what we're going to be doing. And the other side of it is, the grant applications nowadays, they ask a lot of questions about asset management and what your practices are and how you are, capital planning and all that stuff. So by capital planning, you put yourself in a position that you get higher scores on these grant applications.
I hear what you're saying, but I guess it still comes back to the point that I originally asked, and that's why do you just put a 10-year useful life on it when you don't know until somebody, and you're paying for a feasibility study to replace something that may not need to be replaced. And I'm sure when you have someone come and look at the plant, the cost of having that done versus someone look at the plant and then you've already made the assumption that the plant has to be replaced, and you're asking for a feasibility study on something that may be not 10 years down the road, but 30 years down the road, because it's right now, as far as I know, we meet all the federal guidelines as far as our effluent that's going out the door. And you may want to have better effluent going out. I appreciate the fact that you do, but the reality is we're not behind the 8 ball, whereas some of the other plants were not functioning properly. And as far as I'm known, anyone I've talked to, ours does meet the federal regulations currently.
And that's the feasibility. It may say, Bob, it may say that the plant's good for another 30 years and the concrete's being inspected that's underneath it, and the tanks, the fiberglass tanks have been inspected, and the piping into it is being inspected, and they might come back and say that. Greaves Road is an example where we had a feasibility study, and we thought that they might only have 5 years left or whatever it was, and they came back and said, look, if you fix this one tank and you fix those 2 runs and take those trees down, you can extend the life of this plant, I believe, by 10 years.
Well, I know ours was pumped out here a few years ago, and somebody said it was in fair condition, but I don't think it was. I don't know who it was that actually said it was in fair condition, but we have a cement plant here. It's not fiberglass. And my understanding of the inspection that was done, I think it was actually 2018, that the plant appeared to be in fine shape and there was nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, we just need to have a professional come in and inform us of that so we can plan appropriately, Bob. And I think we're on the same page with that. We're just making sure that we can have the best information possible.
Well, you're charging us now, and you're basically legislating fee increases that you're planning on something that's replacing it in 10 years, not 30 years or 40 years, or maybe another 50 years that you've had an expert tell you it may or may not. I mean, I don't know the answer, but I don't know how you guys can sit there and try and make us finance something that may or may not be needed. That's my only point. My point is you've already determined, at least the way you're talking to us and what you want to charge us, that you've made up your mind that we're going to put a new plant in, and nobody has told you we need a new plant.
I think that's a we're just projecting what we have now for the information we have now. And if we have a professional come in and tell us the plant has 30 years, we'll adjust our plans accordingly. We're just doing the best we can with the best information we have available.
That's fair enough. And my final question, I guess, is I asked about your operating budget. I mean, I've lived here for 30 years, and for the first 10 or 15 years I lived here, they used to publish where you spent all your money. If you bought a pump, it showed the pump, where you spent your money. Now I ask the question and all I get is percentages. Percentages don't mean anything because I don't know where you started off with or where. If you look even from your own numbers going back into the 2010 years, it was less than $10,000 a year. Now you've doubled your operating costs, and nobody seems to give me an answer as to where that money is. They give me lots of percentages, but I don't see, I know some of the answers to the questions because I talk to the people and your staff are very good and I appreciate that they turn around and tell me what's going on. But the truth is, I don't see any numbers that used to be provided to us as to how you spent your money. To me, it looks like your budget now is approximately $25,000 a year. It used to be under 10. Now, I know you got more trucks and I know you got more staff. And obviously that feasibility study you're looking at is $10,000. I don't know how you arrive at 10,000, but it's a nice round number. I must admit that, but how do you know it's $10,000? What were these other feasibility studies that you had done on other small plants like ours?
Yeah, they were $7,500 a couple of years ago. So, you know,
So you just said 10.
Yeah,
That's a 30
that's
that's
from our experience, Bob. 2 years ago, a feasibility study was $7,500, and most of the bids we got on that were actually over $7,500. So probably from 2 years ago, $7,500. The way things are going, it probably will be close to $10,000.
That's a 30% increase in a few years then.
Yeah, and so have many of our products that we're purchasing right now. Pipe that we're buying is 30% up in just in the last year. So and so our engineering fees, everything's getting more expensive, Bob.
Well, I know the Fed's just tripled interest rates in the last 3 months. So I mean, obviously your projections on what your rate of return of money is and what costs are going to be, I don't know. I don't think there's an economist out there that predicted a year ago that the Fed would take rates and quadruple them basically in a year. Nobody told me that. I mean, I wish I had known that. I would have wrote a lot of money.
I can see more questions coming in, so we should probably get to somebody else. But the last thing I'd say though, Bob, is that even as Kyle mentioned, sewer pump outs, when you pump your tanks out now, it's double the cost that it was 2 years ago. So it's just upward pressure.
No, I appreciate that. Basically, my main question is, I want to know how long that plant's going to last by someone that knows. And you're
Thanks.
to do that. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Really appreciate it. And you know, a big part of these sessions as well is you know, we're listening to what you're bringing forward as well, and providing responses. And we do have a couple of questions that have come in. And Frank, I see you have your hands up. I'll get back to you very quickly. Just to clarify, Wood Creek, that grant was $767,000. It was $460 from the federal government, and then the province kicked in $307,000. And we got Norbert and Jackie here. They're asking, when is the feasibility study expected to be completed for Jolly Roger and Secret Cove?
yeah. Sorry, Shane.
No, go ahead, Kyle.
I would just say, you know, we're hoping to have it done as soon as possible. And we are looking for grant opportunities, these small cost operating like feasibility studies. There's specific grants out there that pop up from time to time, and so we're just keeping our eyes out for it. I would say in the next 2 or 3 years, if we haven't found any grants, we'll probably be moving forward with it, funded through user fees alone.
But the feasibility itself, we don't have funds yet for that. That's we will be asking the board for those funds in the coming year, and the board has the choice whether to provide those funds or not, and or agree with the funds or not. So it depends on what the board decides to do. If they decide to fund a feasibility report, we would probably start it mid next year. We would put a tender out, hire a contracting company, and probably by the end of next year, hopefully in time for the next budget time, next fall, we would have the results.
Great stuff. Thank you guys. Alan, I see you have a question there. I'll get to you now in a second. Frank, I'm going to bring you into our conversation here. Feel free to unmute and go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Just on pick up on Peter's comment, and I guess my other question, Kyle, just the meeting dates, what's posted on your website. I had a look. There is no December 5th date, but maybe the dates are changing with the new incoming council. And there is an EAS meeting 3rd week of November. So that's listed on your website. But if you could, I would appreciate knowing the dates as well, Kyle, if you're sending out a notice on that. And just one of the other things, in the part of the reasoning behind the Curran Road and the Square Bay proposal extending over till 2027 was that it would give the regional district to apply the principles of asset management and capital reserve creation to all the assets of the regional district and see what the resultant tax rates are. And I don't know where you are on that, but somewhere down the line, I'd be interested to hear what your findings are on that kind of analysis. But I just come to a question here on user fees, and 2 questions. and Shane, you might have answered part of it. I said, where are we going in the 2023 user fees? And yes, costs are increasing, so I'm sure is going to have an impact. And then just on the particular fees you put up on the website, the user fees or the financial breakdown you put, there's a debt principal repayment for Curran Road. It's about 500 and some odd dollars a year. And I think it showed up on the Jolly Roger one as well. I didn't think we had any debt, but I guess we do of some sort. Does anybody know what that is? That's my questions. Thank you.
I'm not sure I can answer that question, Frank. I'll look into that for you. The debt financing.
It's not a critical question. It's not a big number, but
Yeah.
just caught my eye. So
Yeah.
But so
Go ahead.
go ahead. I'm just going to say, while we're on the subject of operating budgets, a lot of people don't understand that there's two fees, one for capital, which Kyle talks a lot about, and I'm talking about operating. And Square Bay has a user fee income basically of somewhere around $67,000, about $67,000, but on paper we have close to a $90,000 budget required to run the plant. So the plant's running in a basically a deficit of user fees. So the board last year chose to use reserves to fund part of that, and that's going to be another decision they're going to need to make this year, because the reserves are very low in Square Bay. They're very, very low. So, and along with the upward pressure of the pump outs that I was talking about, we're looking at possibly $3,000 or $4,000 increase in pump outs for Square Bay this coming year. So, I wanted to be really open about that Square Bay is one of the plants that's underfunded in user fees. And we're trying to correct frontage fees, as with Kyle's graphs and a lot of input from yourself and other people. But we're also trying to correct the underfunding of the plants. So that will have to be addressed this fall.
is the Curran Road underfunded, or does the user fees match the?
I think Curran Road is close here. Let's see.
Your records show for last year it was pretty close.
Yeah, it's 100. It's within a couple $100. It's very close, and I think that's similar for Jolly Roger and Secret Cove as well. Jolly Roger's a little bit underfunded, a couple $1,000s, and I think Secret Cove is under $1,000 underfunded. So we're trying to correct that underfunding, but Secret Cove Square Bay is quite underfunded, and that's been knocking the reserves down.
Mm-hmm. Ditto. I hope that answers your question, Frank.
Yeah, and just one further comment. You said the Square Bay operating was 90,000 a year, and Curran's in the 42,000 range a year. It's about half. That's a big spread. I don't need an explanation. It's just my observation. I know Square Bay's got a bigger population and the like, but seems a big spread.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, their infiltration events cause the need for pump outs, and that's exacerbated.
And on that, Kyle, like if staff would get called out in the middle of the night because of a high flow, because of infiltration, like, we need to address it. It's one of these things that we can't, a lot of things at your desk you can just push off for the next day kind of thing. We need to address it immediately, and we need to get a truck out there. And those trucks, when they show up on site, sort of start off at $1,500, $2,000, and you have staff out in the middle of the night trying their best to address the situation. So, and that's only one load. If you haul in two trucks, you're up to 5,000. So these budgets, usually the budgets, even though 60,000 sounds like a lot of money, it's not when you get 2 or 3 of those events in a year. And that's why we're trying to address the infiltration.
That's a good explanation on this differences in user fees between systems, and so thank you very much.
Frank, you had a question there about other capital plans, and I just thought I'd touch on it. We do have capital planning for recreation services, so all of the facilities there has been in place for about 5 years now. Same with protective services. So all the fire departments have capital plans, and this year we'll be presenting parks first round of capital planning, and we're working on a draft one for the water service. So definitely we are working to push across all the services here at SCRD.
Thanks for your questions, Frank. Really appreciate it. We've another question here from Alan. Alan's asking, are you concerned with the I guess controversy over water storage in the SCRD, that grants your request for water storage issues will affect your applications for sewage treatment? Alan, maybe I can address that a little bit. In my role in communications and as the information officer for the Emergency Operations Centre, I can tell you right now that I think the water supply issue that we have here on the coast essentially has reached the ears of the province and the feds as well, the federal government, based off the fact that we've had to declare a state of local emergency. But I don't know about the grant side of it. Maybe Kyle, Shane, I'm going to presume that these are kind of different pots that we pull grants from. Am I right in saying that, like, we'd apply for different ones through water supply as opposed to sewage, and they may not necessarily be interlinked? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sometimes they overlap, but usually the grants will ask for water improvements to places that don't have water treatment or something like that, or they might ask for environmental improvements. So if you're having a wastewater plant that's discharging high levels of effluent, that you might be more applicable to that grant. So yes, sometimes the grants overlap, but usually they're specific, that it's a wastewater plant or something similar to that would be applicable for the grant.
Thank you, Shane. Deb, I see you've had your hand up there for a while. Thanks so much for sticking around with us here. I'm going to promote you in to ask your question directly to our panel here. We've got about 8 minutes or so left, so if anybody else has a question, feel free to put it in the Q&A and also into the chat. Deb, I see you've unmuted yourself there, so feel free to ask your question.
Great, thank you very much. My question goes to the grants and seeking of the grants, and how important timing might be. And I guess this question will be a little bit of crystal ball gazing and a little bit about politics, but it seems to me that it might matter if we're seeking grants now with certain government in Ottawa and a certain government in BC, that they might be more amenable than they might be if we have governmental changes. And I'm not sure, if thought is given to that. And so really, Secret Cove, we're a little bit down the way. We still need to have our feasibility study done before we can even get to that point of applying for grants. And at that point, we might have had governmental changes where they're not so willing to make grants in these situations. Is that something that you've thought about, provided for, can shed any sort of light on?
I try to stay out of politics as much as I can, but yeah. No, I haven't particularly thought about that, but I do know for sure you're not going to get a grant if you don't have a feasibility study. So it's talk about getting timing. It's talking about getting ready to apply for a grant when they come up. And there have been times that it's like, oh, darn, they seem to have them quite tight. They'll say you have to apply within a month or 6 weeks or something like that. And it's worked for us a few times, but a couple times it's like, darn, I wish we had a feasibility study for Secret Cove. So once we have this feasibility study for Secret Cove, Jolly Roger, we're ready when they come out. And if we have it done by next fall, maybe there'll be some out then. I'm not. When's the next election, Deb?
Yeah, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I could tell you that.
You have to be prepared for when they come up. It's almost like when a job opening comes up. Your dream job opening isn't the time to go and get your diploma or something. You have to be prepared for it when the job comes up, and you have to be prepared for when the grant opportunities come up.
Yeah, I think that's it. The grants, we don't seek grants out so much as they are presented as opportunities that we get, come across our desk and we apply for. So you don't just ask, solicit for money without having a grant opportunity. So like Shane said, having the feasibility study and having a plan of action.
Sure.
Yeah.
I understand that, but of course we have to get to the feasibility study first. Exactly. And we're not at that point before we can move to the next phase.
Yeah. And hopefully within a year from now, we'll have one and we'll have more input. As Bob was saying earlier, maybe we'll find that there's 10 or 15 years left in the plant, and we can just extend the life out, and it might recommend for us to put on a nice coat of paint or something. But if the report comes out and says that we need to replace it, it's in dire need of replacement, then that'd be great to put on a grant application.
Okay, thank you very much.
Nice. Thanks so much for asking your question, Deb. Really appreciate it. We got no more questions here right now. Had you something to add there, Shane?
Yeah, I just wanted to say before we close off and people start dropping off here, I'm really impressed with the attendees tonight. It's really nice to have people participating and having so many people here. We've done a few of these. We have to admit that like there's been 2 people, and it's great to have such good feedback and input, and maybe encourage your friends to come to the next one, and maybe we'll get 48 next time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, the conversation continues through the Let's Talk pages. We have put some work into them. And if you are asking questions on them, we're getting to them in as timely a manner as possible, and the answers of them. And we do recognize that, folks are on the call here, and your neighbors and other users of these wastewater treatment facilities want information. So we are listening to the feedback that we're receiving on the type of information that we're providing out to. And I see no more questions here, and all I'd ask is, again, here we go, Frank. Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Frank. You're going to ask those questions via Let's Talk. Really appreciate that, and we'll get back to you on that. And like I said, share the Let's Talk pages with folks who may have missed tonight. Everyone received a letter out to their homes and letting them know about these sessions and about those pages as well. And as soon as we end today, the YouTube recording will be available on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Sunshine Coast RD. And I'll also be putting that link up onto the Let's Talk pages here, likely tomorrow morning as well. And so I'm ready to close it out here. I'm not too sure, Shane or Kyle, if you have anything else you want to add. But if not, I'll thank both of you for coming. Kyle and yourself, Shane, you've been probably working about 22 hours a day here right now in the water situation what's going on. So thank you so much. And thanks to everybody, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for